Okay, welcome to week 4, chapter 4. Now we're going to be talking about written messages. So in chapter 3, we covered steps 1 through 5 of the communication process, and that was all before we communicate, before we actually write something to somebody. So out of those 7 steps, 5 of the 7 were things we do, plan, evaluate the audience, etc., pick the channel before we actually write the message. So in chapter 4, we're going to actually go through steps 6 and 7, which are about writing the message. Your key terms are listed here. So if I don't cover these in the slides that you're about to listen to, make sure you check the study guide and reference the study guide at the back of your chapter index, and catch these definitions of terms. All right, let's dive in. So 4 learning objectives for this week. So, it's assumed that you already can write at a college English level. There's a prereq for the course with a certain writing standard. So we're not going to dive too heavily into revisiting grammar and sentence structure, but this chapter 4, is going to top line some of those components, and the bulk of my lecture is really going to focus on this 4th learning outcome about revising and proofreading messages to make sure you have good content, organization, style, and tone. The good rule of thumb when we're writing, especially for business, is that when we write for business, we're leaving a written record of our attention to detail, and we're going to be judged based on the quality and correctness of that message. So much like having a conversation with somebody who has food stuck in their teeth, when we read a message that has grammar and spelling errors in it, we make judgments about the author of that message. We notice it, we make those judgments, but we oftentimes don't say anything about it. So in business, these types of impressions on our written work can really damage our career. So we want to make sure that if we're taking the time to actually send out a written message, we want to get it right. So let's go back and look at the 7 steps of planning and preparing spoken and written messages. Chapter 3 was steps 1 through 5, and now we're going to be looking at actually preparing the draft, and step 7, revising and proofreading that draft. So Hemingway had a great phrase that he said, "There is no good writing, only rewriting." Ernest Hemingway, classic American author. So I like to mention that revisions are part of the process, because I think as writers, we oftentimes are a little hard on ourselves if we have to revise our work, if we don't get it right the first time. When I worked at my very first advertising agency, there was a 0 tolerance for any errors in the copy of our ads, or on the coupon dates or promotional offer dates. The ad had to be perfect before it went to press. And even though the client signed off on the ad and the creative director signed off on the ad, me as the account executive, I was the main liaison between the client and the agency. And so if there was an ad that had a mistake in it and the client paid several $100,000 to run that ad, the agency is going to have to rerun that ad. And that's a very expensive mistake to have happen, and it was the kind of mistake that would cost me my job. So there was just 0 tolerance for any errors on that. So whenever I sat down to proof an ad, a print ad that we're talking about, that was about to go to press, my assumption was always this: there's something wrong, I just need to find it. And I think oftentimes, particularly with, we now work so much in the digital space, we don't print stuff out as much and look at actual hard copies of things, that we tend to have more of a skim mentality when we're reviewing our written work. Yeah, it looks good, it's gold, and unless something pops out that's a mistake, I'm going to assume it's good. So versus a much more serious proofreading process of, there's something wrong, it's not ready yet, in other words, I just need to find out what is wrong. Certainly with all the editing tools now on whatever word processing you use, it lets us know if we have a spelling error and grammar and spelling errors. So that's great stuff, but you could still spell a word correctly and it could be the wrong word out of context for this specific written message that you're creating. So we want to make sure that we're okay with having a revision process, and we want to be okay with proofreading for accuracy. I'm still a fan of printing something out and reading it before it actually goes out. So what I want to talk about are the 4 pillars of quality written messages. And this is kind of boiling down chapter 4 into these 4 main buckets: style, tone, grammar, and punctuation. And let me top line these for you. Style is essentially the clothes that your document is wearing. Is it informal or is it formal? So different types of writing styles are going to affect a different readability of your message. With business, we're striving for a professional style to our writing. That doesn't mean we're excessively wordy and verbose. Our writing shouldn't sound like a legal contract, but we're going for a professional and concise style with our message. So that's, the kind of clothes that our document is wearing. The second item is tone. If style is the appearance of your document, is it left aligned? Is it in block format? We'll get to that later. Is it easy to read with lots of white space? Is it visually appealing? That's the style, the clothes that your document is wearing. Tone is the mood of your document. Is it serious? Is it playful? Is it mean? Is it blunt? So different words that we choose are going to affect the tone of your document. For business writing, we want a concise professional style and a positive tone to our message. Tone. Style is the clothes your document is wearing, and tone is the mood of your document. The third pillar is grammar. And think of grammar mistakes. So this is primarily sentence structure issues. When we're reading a document that has a bunch of grammar mistakes in it, it's very similar to having a conversation with somebody who has a mouthful of food. They're trying to communicate to us, but we're having a hard time following them. We're having a hard time following the message because of the grammar mistakes. It's like listening to somebody with a mouthful of food. We're getting interrupted by all the grammar mistakes. And then your fourth pillar is punctuation. So this is when to use commas and when to use quotes and when do you have a period. So we're going to top line each of these. So your 4 pillars: style, tone, grammar, and punctuation. Punctuation, let me add a little bit there. Punctuation is really the rules of the road. If your document was a car and we're reading the message, punctuation is telling us when to stop, when to pause, when to shift gears. Punctuation helps us navigate the road. All right, let's go into a little bit more detail with some examples on each of these pillars. So to expand more on style, your first of 4 pillars, we mentioned that we want to write with a concise business style. So business is about being efficient and yet still remaining positive. We want a concise business style, and to do that we avoid excessive wordiness. So don't be redundant in your language. Don't say visible to the naked eye. Visible and naked eye, those are redundant phrases. Avoid excessive wordiness. Don't use cliches. Don't use 10 words to communicate something that you can say in 5 words. So with business writing versus maybe some of the other English courses that you've taken where it's a little more academic in style, we get to the point. So we want to avoid excessive wordiness, but we also, to item 2, pillar 2, we want to maintain a positive tone. So the words that we choose really impact the tone of our document. And in your chapter 4 textbook, in the chapter 4 of your textbook, there's some good examples of word choice and how it can impact the tone. So an easy way to make sure that you have a positive tone is focus on what you can do, particularly when we're writing to customers. You won't want to say, we cannot complete your order. Instead, you would say, we can complete your order if you fill out this missing information. So focus on what you can do and focus on what is right about the situation versus what is wrong. So we'll work some examples of this when you have some written exercises at the end of this lecture. Concise business style and a positive tone. Under grammar, one way to avoid a lot of grammar mistakes is don't write big, complicated, long sentences. Have a simple message structure. So message structure isn't just about sentences, it's about the entire message itself. A common mistake that a lot of students make, and a lot of folks make these same mistakes, is they don't chunk their content in their message. And by chunking, I mean breaking up the message into smaller, bite-sized, digestible pieces. With text messaging, we've all gotten a little, perhaps too comfortable in just writing one big block of text. In other words, when you compose a message, it is one big block of text. There's no paragraphs, and it's all one big wall of words, if you will. That's very hard for the reader to interpret. So here's a simple tip that you can use to chunk up your message, and it'll signal when you need to start a new paragraph. And that is simply this: read your document aloud. So read your document aloud, and if there's points in your document where you're shifting gears to a new thought, there's a transition to a new point, then that's a signal that you should start a new paragraph. Also, if you outline your document, which is one of those steps 1 through 5, that chapter 3, kind of organize your document, that organization of your document, just taking a few minutes to kind of take your main topic sentence and your subpoints, each of those is going to be a new paragraph. So it's okay in business writing to actually have a single sentence paragraph. So you might have very short paragraphs in business writing, and many of your documents are going to be just a few pages in length. Certainly the letters that you're writing for your assignments in this class are just going to be 1 to 2 pages in length. So read your document aloud, and if it feels like you're shifting gears to a new thought, a new point, that's a signal it's time for a new paragraph. Another concept of related to chunking is using bullet points. There's some good examples in chapter 4. Business oftentimes is providing a bunch of detailed numbers. We deal with dollars, with percentages, and if you were to present numbers in a paragraph form, it's very hard for the reader to pull that information out. So in business writing, we have extensive use of graphics. That can be tables, that can be charts, and it can certainly be bullet points. If you were sending a letter and you had, say, 4 or 5 questions that you wanted to ask of the receiver of that letter, would you list them in paragraph form? Or would it be easier for the reader to digest and clarify where those questions are if they were put in bullet points? You would certainly use bullet points. So we use bullet points a lot, and we also use some of those graphics I mentioned earlier. We'll get into graphics in a few chapters. But bullet points are a simple way of calling out key information. So use a simple message structure, read your document aloud, and chunk it into bite-sized pieces, new paragraphs, or bullet points when there's new information. And your fourth pillar is punctuation. So again, punctuation is the rules of the road as the reader is reading your document. Punctuation gives them signals, this sentence is ending. This is a quote. It's time to pause here, and we have a comma to do that. I think one area where a lot of us get confused is around the use of commas. When do I use commas? When do I not use commas? And even if you are using word processing, it doesn't always signal when you're supposed to use a comma. So again, now we're talking about short sentences. Short sentences. Read each sentence aloud. read each sentence aloud. And if there's a point in that sentence where there's a pause, like I'm doing right now, then that would have a comma at that pause point. So read your document aloud, and if it reads better with a pause in it, then that's a signal that you should probably put a comma there. Comma rules can be very complex, regarding lists, etc. And there's some good exercises on commas in your exercise at the end of this lecture. But that pause piece will help you navigate most of your comma errors. All right, so that's a little more detail, kind of in a basic display method for style, tone, grammar, and punctuation. Style, concise business style. Tone, we want to strike a positive tone, not be accusatory or blaming or critical. We want to have a simple message structure where the document is visually appealing and broken into separate paragraphs and bullet points so it's all very easy to read. And we want to write in short sentences. And we want to use commas to break up pause points. Okay. Let's go into a few more detail out of some of the key points in Chapter 4. So we touched on this in the Chapter 3 lecture, deductive versus inductive. Deductive is when the audience is going to be pleased to receive the information, they're not upset to get your message, then you can start with the main point up front. You start with the main point up front, and then you provide some additional detail at the end. For example, if you were sending out an email to all of your staff that you made your employee bonuses this year, you would start with that good news. Congratulations, everybody's getting a bonus. You wouldn't build up to the bonus point. When the audience is going to be resistant or unpleased with the news, for example, your bad news message or your persuasive, trying to sell somebody message, then you want to use the inductive approach. With the inductive approach, you are paving the way first, building a case, if you will, and your main point comes at near the end of your message. So that's the difference between the inductive and deductive approach. Make sure you understand those 2 points because you will be quizzed on that. Take a moment and look at these 2 examples. So on the left is a memo, and you can see that there's a request here, and the information is all in one big single paragraphed chunk. And compare that to the message on the right where it's broken into 3 paragraphs. So as you read the one on the left, you can see there's transition points that warrant starting a new paragraph. So you can say we have a second paragraph on the right. I would do this myself. And then we have another new paragraph. Thanks a lot for this favor. That's a new transition point. So again, read your document and look for transition points, and that's a signal for a new paragraph. The bottom line is you do not want big, long paragraphs in business writing. So if you're getting into a paragraph that is more than 8 or 10 lines, that's probably too long for most business messages. Certainly the written messages in this course. The exception would be your research paper at the end of the semester. That's going to have some longer paragraphs. But for your direct request message and your bad news message and your persuasive, short paragraphs. Okay, so if you go back to your week 4 module and you go to the week 4 resource page, you'll see some document links for writing exercises. So I want you to go ahead and open up and print off those writing exercises. And what you'll see is some scenarios on the left, and then you will write in your new and improved version on the right. So this is self-study. I'm not quizzing you on this. You're not turning anything in for points, but I'm encouraging you very much to go through these practice exercises. And if you're struggling with them, send me an email. There's some good case studies to work through in Chapter 4 as well. And then in week 5, I'll actually be shooting out the answers and posting those on Canvas. So take a minute and please do those writing exercises. Thank you.